later on. Dane, I'm going to let you go ahead and introduce who we're working with tonight.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, some of us had questions about casting and the properties and whatnot of how to do it and get the best results and everything like that. So one of the premier casters out in the casting world that supplies blanks to the various pen warehouses and whatnot, and personally for personal sales and as a friend of mine, and I just think he makes the most outstanding blanks out there. But it's Robert Franklin. He goes by Bob. He's out in Colorado, and he has volunteered to put on a demo of casting tonight. I'm not sure if he's going to do pen blanks or a bottle stopper or a dragon egg type blank, but those are just some of the various items that he does do. And so once I turn everything over to Bob, if any of the members have questions, please put it in the chat and I will queue you up and ask the question for Bob to answer in the background while he's working. And so he's gonna do his demo. I think he's gonna go all the way through with a complete casting. And with that casting, we're gonna figure out a way for the members here tonight, and some lucky member is going to be blessed with an outstanding blank or two. So with that, I am going to turn you over to Mr. Robert Franklin. Let me find him and put him on spotlight. And I think you are there, Bob.
Yeah, I'm here.
There you are.
Well, thanks for having me, everybody. Much appreciated to be here. It's a lot of fun. I've done demonstrations for the AW and all our local clubs around here. For you, those of you that don't know who we are, I'm, like you said, I'm Bob Franklin. Me and my wife own and operate FranklinBlanksandCrafts.com, and I'm a wood turner as well, a turner, and I'm a turner that makes blanks for turners. So kind of have to know what you guys are after to make them the best that we can, and that's the best way I can go about that. But we do blanks in all sizes, everything from pin blanks size up, and we get into big bottle stoppers and bigger even type pours for things like pepper mills, salt and pepper mills.
Very nice.
Like that. We also have an art series line that my wife works on with us, with me, and we stabilize the burl, and then she takes it up to her studio and builds these crazy little worlds inside. For somebody to turn something awesome out of.
Very nice.
So it gets kind of intricate and crazy, but it's a lot of fun. Most of our business is for pin turners, bottle stopper guys, but yeah, we get bombarded all the way through, which is great. And we do custom casts for people as well. So I was going to kind of do, if you guys don't mind, I don't know how much time we have. Dane, do you know how much time we have?
I think we have a little over an hour, hour and a half.
Perfect.
No. And we have to disappear in about an hour.
Okay.
In an hour. Okay, hour.
Okay. Well, okay. If we want to do a cast, I can do a cast. The resin I'm using takes 45 minutes to set under pressure. If we're going to do that, I can do it right away, get it in the pressure pot, and then we can talk and we can go over the whole process, and then we can go over and answer questions, and then at the end we can pull it out, and those are the blanks that we can give away to whoever, however you guys want to do that. Does that sound like a plan?
Sounds like
I'd rather than cast something tonight, I got a little distracted just now. I'd like to see the turning, and maybe we can set up another demo with you for the casting and what to go through and such, and do that kind of pea and nut thing. I mean, and because we do want to see some gathered from our members and take some Q&A, and
sure.
We don't push it to the outside edge.
So Captain Eddie, then did you say you wanted to just do the field questions tonight then and then do a demonstration another night?
I like to do the casting demonstration another evening.
Okay, let's do that. So let's just go over the process and explain different resins and the safety of it, and then if that works, and then we can talk about all the different things that go into casting, and then I can field questions, and that would certainly eat up the time tonight. So
well, yeah, that helps because we've seen methods and without and some really great explanation, but we're wood turners. We don't catch anything the first time. So
right.
let's continue along that line.
Okay, well that sounds like a good plan. And we'll just plan on doing a demo another night for you, and that works just fine for me.
Turning.
So the biggest thing, let's talk about safety and let's talk about different types of resin. So first of all, know your resin, whatever you're going to use. There's MSDS sheets on it. Whoever you're getting it from has to supply them, or they have to supply a link to them. And make sure you read them over, because some of these resins are very toxic. Some of them are you don't want to handle at all. Some of them are pretty user-friendly. So it goes all the way from one extreme to the other. So just know your resin, read up on it. For tonight's main thing, I use a product called Alumilite. Alumilite is a manufacturer. They literally have 20 different kinds of resin, including epoxies, polyester resins, urethane resins, mold making resins. They have a whole line of them. So when somebody says Alumilite, don't just go by that. You got to find out what they're actually talking about, what type. For wood turners, their urethane resin is specifically formulated for us. It's made to be machined. And it's a wonderful resin. It's very forgiving, and it's very, you're able to use it with wood, mainly different materials, embed objects in it. The biggest thing is that it's very moisture sensitive, and whatever you're putting into it has to be completely dry. And I can tell you how to achieve that. And then we'll talk about stabilizing and whether it should be stabilized as well with it. So going back to the beginning a little bit, we're going to be talking mainly about the resin I'm using, which is, it's called Alumilite Clear. There's Alumilite Clear, there's Alumilite Clear Slow. Both of those are urethane resins. Both of them have the almost exact same characteristics, with the difference of Alumilite Clear is made for smaller casts. Alumilite Clear Slow is made for larger casts. And when I say larger, this pepper mill was made with Alumilite Clear. So this is the resin that's made for pin blanks and smaller stuff. And we use it for everything up to about this size. If you're going to do a bowl blank or something bigger, then I would suggest you go to Alumilite Clear Slow. And the reason being is you have a longer work time, for one, and it doesn't set as fast. It takes longer to set, so you don't have as much problems with heat cracks and stress cracks and things like that that can happen. When this resin, any kind of resin, when it's curing, it has a heat transfer, and that it gets extremely hot. This will get up to about 240 degrees while it's curing. And if you, with a bigger cast, the more the mass, the hotter it gets. And when it's starting to cool, the more prone it is to cracking. So use the resin that you're wanting to, based on your size. Anything bigger than like a peppermill blank, just use Clear Slow. Anything smaller, then you could probably get by with Alumilite Clear. Alumilite Clear has a 7-minute work time, they say. Alumilite Clear Slow has a 14-minute work time. So factor that in too, because with Alumilite Clear Slow, you can do small cast with it all day long as well. So if you need more time, if you think 7 minutes, I can't do it, I'm going to be under pressure, too much pressure, well then just get the Clear Slow, because you can do pin blanks with it as well. It just takes longer. It's a 14-hour set time, meaning you have 14 minutes to get it in the pressure pot under pressure. And at that point, and then you have to wait 2 hours to demold. That's what they say for Alumilite Clear Slow. With Alumilite Clear, it's a 1 hour demold, 45 minutes. Now, also the heat of your shop matters too. I can tell you we're in Colorado, and I'm in basically a garage workshop, and I have a little bit of heat in here, so it stays about 70 degrees in the winter, and in the summer it'll get up to about 85 in my shop. And literally the difference from 65 to 85 can be in 4 or 5 minutes of work time. So you got to factor that in too. In the summertime, when it's hot, I have less work time because the resin is going off faster, because it's generating heat, and it hits that hot zone that it starts curing at, and it goes from there. So I can tell you about pressure pots a little bit, and we'll get into that, and we'll talk about stabilizing with vacuum with that. You can't use a vacuum chamber with this type of resin. Some epoxies don't set for 24 hours, so you can literally degas them in a vacuum chamber. Where this resin sets so quickly, there's no way to get the gas out of it in time in a vacuum chamber, so you have to use a pressure pot with it. My advice to you all as wood turners is, if you're trying to do a cast where you're building up on a piece of burl, or you're building up something and you're adding on to a piece of wood, then this is the resin for you. If you're trying to fill a small void, say you turn a bowl and it's got a nice little crack, natural crack in it, and you want to fill that, then this is not the right resin for you. In that case, I would look at, if you're trying to just fill cracks and stuff, I would do an epoxy. I personally use like a 15-minute epoxy for that, because I can apply it right on my lathe or right on my turning right away. And then 15 minutes later, it's dry enough I can turn. And you can put whatever you want in it. You can put coffee grounds or mica powders or different colors that way. You know, the world is your option as far as what to put in it to achieve cool stuff, including stone, turquoise, and I mean, there's so much you can do. But if you're trying to fill something, then look at epoxies for that. If you don't have a pressure pot and you don't want to buy a pressure pot, there's other options besides this resin. You can use epoxies. Some of them are designed for casting. Liquid diamonds, I have liquid diamonds here. It's a casting resin, says right on it, for casting. And you can get it through, like Turner's Warehouse has it. And it's a 2-part resin as well. And it's mixed by volume, not by weight. So again, you got to know your resin. It's like a 2-to-1 ratio, and it's okay, but what happens is anything over like a bottle stopper size, I don't like it, because it has a kind of a shrink factor when it's curing, and a lot of times it'll pop off the burl or the wood, or it just doesn't adhere well. Or you get stress cracks with bigger cracks because it cures too fast. So again, with bigger items, that's why we use this Alumilite Clear Slow. The other thing to know about Alumilite Clear resin is that, either clear or clear slow, is that it does have a shelf life. So getting it through a reputable manufacturer to ensure you're getting fresh resin is a good thing. By that I mean, if you buy it through alumilite.com, you know you're going to get fresh resin. Turntex.com is my stabilization supplier, Curtis Seaback, and one of the best stabilizing resins on the market. And I actually order all my casting resin through him as well, because I know it's going to be fresh. He goes through enough. There are some wholesalers out there that, you know, I know even like Woodcraft is carrying some of it now. So my question is, how long has it been sitting on Woodcraft's shelf? We don't know. I honestly, I don't know. And this has basically a 1-year shelf life is what they tell you. As what happens is over time is that it will, side B of it will start yellowing and thicken up. And you wind up having to, there's things you can do to rejuvenate it and probably get over a year out of it, but it starts getting hard to work with. And if you're trying to do a clear cast or a translucent cast, that yellowing may affect it as being completely clear. So something else to think about there too is that all resins will yellow over time. And that usually happens with the more it's exposed to UV light. So if you're doing translucents or clear, something in clear, like our desk clock that I showed you, you want to try to keep it out of the sun. That desk clock was turned 2 years ago and it's not yellow at all, but if you put it out in a window and set it there for a while, you would start tinting, getting a yellow tint to it. Unfortunately, there is some resins out there now that have UV blockers in them. But again, I don't use them. I'm using one that's formulated specifically for turning and machining. And when I say machining, I mean fine machining as well. So this is a pin, a kitless pin that I made. It's a one-piece custom pin, and this is threaded. All this is threaded Alumilite with caps and dies. So it takes threads wonderfully. That's how well it machines. You can get very intricate. It's great for boxes, lidded boxes for lids, stuff like that. Let's go back to safety now, again with the Alumilite Clear. So again, this is with Alumilite Clear resin, not with epoxies or anything. So typically when I'm doing a cast, first of all, let's talk about sensitivities. Everybody has sensitivities to different things. You all know as wood turners that my friend Mike over here might have allergic reactions to cocobolo. Jim over here, it's Paduke. You know, it's different with everybody. Some people don't have any reactions. With resin, some people have reactions with breathing it. Some people have reactions with touching it. Some people don't have any reactions at all until they actually get sensitized to it. So they build up a sensitivity over time. So that can happen as well. So it's always a good idea to wear gloves, rubber gloves. I just wear nitrile gloves. I try to not get any skin contact at all. That's important for me. If you read the MSDS sheets on this resin, this particular resin, they'll tell you that A side is pretty much harmless. B side, prolonged skin exposure is not recommended. So take that for what it's worth. But that tells me I don't want to get it on my skin. I want to try to keep it off my skin. And when it's in liquid form, if you do get it on your skin, just go wash off with soap and water. It does clean off pretty easily if it's liquid. The other thing is buying the amount of resin that you're going to use. Again, with that shelf life, they sell it all the way from, I think, pints to 80-pound kits, which is basically 10 gallons of resin, and that's what I buy it in. Obviously, the bigger quantity you buy, the cheaper you get it, but you better use it within your shelf life. So try to keep that in mind. Going back to safety again, I do typically recommend you wear a mask. I wear a mask. I just use, typically I'm just using a cloth mask. I'm not really, I know I don't have sensitivities and I just try not to breathe it. I usually have a fan blowing away from me running yeah, there's that. But you know, if you really want to be safe, getting a chemical respirator would be a good thing. This resin has virtually no smell at all. The only time I can honestly smell it is when I'm turning it, and that's if I'm really turning full speed and I've got some heat building up. Otherwise, you really don't smell it. This resin is great for that. You can cast in your house. You're not going to stink up your house. If anybody's ever casted with polyester resin, you know that, I mean, that stuff is just noxious. But so basically we have epoxies, polyester resin, and urethane resins. that are made for casting. Most of the time, epoxies are made for a skim coat. They're not really made for a deep cast, so keep that in mind as well. Let's see, safety, what else? I think that covered safety pretty well. I do wear glasses over my glasses. You don't want this stuff in your eyes at all. A good friend of mine that is a resin caster as well wound up with a drop in his eye when he was mixing it, and $5,000 ER bill later to have an eye wash. So not something I want to try to do. Okay, so that was safety. And we went over resin types already. Does anybody have questions on safety or resin types? If you do, let's talk about them now. Yes, I will talk about volume versus weight. Absolutely. We'll get to that here shortly.
On the pressure pot with the max pressure to put them on.
So pressure pot wise, Alumilite will tell you that you need 40 pounds minimum. I have 3 pressure pots. They're not really visible in the camera. Well, one is right here. This is a 2.5 or a 5 gallon Grizzly. I'll push it to 60 pounds. I have a Harbor Freight pot that was the first pot I ever started with that I won't go over 40 pounds with. And I have a 10 gallon pot down here that is certified with a stamp on it, with a metal stamp that's engraved in it, to 110 pounds. The problem with these little pots is that they tell you that they're good, you know, they're rated to 60 pounds or rated to 80 pounds. Well, that's the guys putting a sticker on them. Nobody ever tests them, these Chinese pots. They just don't. And the only way you're going to know if you're getting a pot that is truly tested is if it has a metal sticker on it. And there's only a few companies like Binks and California Air Tools that actually go to that extreme. So know your pot and just push your resin to that. I can tell you this, 40 pounds of pressure will do the job. If I'm trying to push resin into, say, wormy stuff, a wormy piece of oak or something with a lot of tunnels and canals, then I want it in my bigger pot and I would push it to 110 because I'm really trying to push resin into every cranny that's possible. But 40 pounds will do the job for most of the things you guys are doing. And is what happens is, to begin with, you have to realize that we deal with a lot of things that have, like burl, for example, that'll have open eyes inside. So it's an open pocket of an eye, or an open wormhole that got filled with frass part of the way and not the rest, so it's only open on the inside. Resin won't get into those. It's not going to fill interior voids that don't make it to the surface. So you're going to have, if you're turning something like that, you're going to always have some interior holes that you're going to have to do some filling on while it's on your lathe. Or when you cut it, cut open it, cut into it. Yes, I absolutely have a blow-off valves on my pressure pot. That's a must-have for me, and I push it to what I'm comfortable with that pot. Like I said, a Harbor Freight pot, I don't trust at all. They have very, very cheap 1/4 inch, basically, or 5/16 bolts that are Chinese steel. I don't, for the lid, I don't really like them. On this pot, you see you have big 5/8 bolts that actually latch it down. I trust them a lot more. And I do run blow-offs, and I put it at what I think the pot should be maxed at. So my little pot is at 40. This pot, it would be at 60. And my big one, I set it right at 105 pounds. Doesn't mean I'm going to fill it to that all the time. If I'm doing pin blanks in my big pot, if my other 2 pots are full and I'm doing pin blanks in it, you know, 40, 50 pounds, and you're fine. The other thing is, if your pot is leaking a little bit, air, you need it to hold air that first. If you're using Alumilite clear that sets in in 45 minutes, you need it to hold 40 pounds basically for 20-25 minutes. At that point, it's so thick you're not popping bubbles anymore. So what happens with pressure is you're blowing the bubbles up so small that they're the size of a pinhead that you'll never ever see them. You're not getting rid of them. They're still there. They're just microscopic. So that's the theory with pressure. What else do we have?
Yeah, we get a lot of feedback from members right now that they go in between themselves to discuss problems and situations and products and stuff like that. I'm glad you cleared up the thing about the Harbor Freight saving you money. Saving you money might cost you your life.
Right.
So you have to see if there's a trade-off on that.
Absolutely. I'll say this about pressure pots. California Air Tools makes one that is that's made for casting. It's already set up for resin casting. There's only 1 or 2 people out there right now that are actually making one that's set up from the factory for resin casting. The rest of them are set up for paint spraying. So you're having to modify them right off the bat. And I can tell you that these Harbor Freight ones, they don't pre-thread anything. Literally, they don't. They force thread everything in. So, and then they put pipe dope on it. So when you go to try to take stuff off to put your stuff on, I mean, it's yeah, you got everything in your and their brother trying to get these fittings off to do it. So it's a scary thing already. Yeah, I mean, it just is. Also, keep your lids, if you're running pressure pots, keep them lubed up. This one hasn't been cleaned in a while. Keep them lubed up, though. I use Vaseline on the seals. I'll blow it off real good, take the seal out once a month or so. But I cast every day with these two. So, and then I'll re-Vaseline. If you're running your pressure pot and you're filling it with air and you hear it ticking, literally ticking, like a time bomb ticking, that means that the seal is expanding to try to compress to seal. So it's time to add some Vaseline to that seal and rejuvenate that rubber, because you probably got a leak around your seal. If you got leaks and it won't hold air long enough, then you can also spray all your fittings with soap and water. That whole trick works, and you'll see bubbles with them. So let's talk about moles, if we don't have many questions on pressure pots now.
One quick question. You talked about getting a void, it doesn't fill an internal void. So when you're turning, you may have to go back and refill. When
Right.
you do that, do you have to put it back in the pressure pot, or do you just do it on the lathe?
No, usually the holes are small, then tiny. You're talking like the size of a big pinhead that you're trying to fill a hole. You know, it's either a wormhole or an open eye. Let me show you. Let me see if I can find a piece of cottonwood burl here that you're trying to fill. So they're tiny. Here's a piece of cottonwood burl, and you can see these eyes here. Like this one is open, and I could take literally a little pinhead and stick it inside, and it doesn't go very deep, but it's an open eye. And those are the things on the surface that'll fill. That one would fill, but if those eyes are inside as well and they're open like that, they won't fill, but they're tiny. So then I would be using, personally, I do a lot of those holes just with CA, super glue, thick super glue. I use thick for the most part. And obviously I have all these mica powders. That's what you see here behind us. If it was a colored blank, you know, and it's blue, then I would use some blue mica with my CA. So what I would do is I put the mica in the hole, and then I drizzle either thin CA or I mix up some thick with some mica in it and just fill that hole with it. Spray it with activator, and then 5 minutes later, you're turning your piece. That's my way that I fill a lot of open voids. If the hole is bigger, then I would use like a 15-minute epoxy, or you have to do multiple coats, but of CA. If that answered that. Yeah, if you wound up with a big open hole inside, you could certainly put it back in the mold and recast it. But You know, if you're buying blanks from somebody and you don't have that capability, then CA or epoxy is your friend. So
Will
go
the
ahead.
epoxy cure outside of a pressure pot?
So epoxies, they say with most of these epoxies, they'll tell you that you don't need a pressure pot. I can tell you that that's a lot of hogwash. So they still have bubble problems, and usually you're having to use heat to pop the bubbles, and it's surface bubbles, but sometimes the bubbles can get pretty far in. So ideally, you're still using a pressure pot, even with them. The biggest disadvantage, I guess, of this resin, honestly, is cost. It's not cheap. A 2-gallon kit, basically, I think it's called a 16-pound kit. I haven't bought that in a while, but I think it's 180 bucks shipped, 160 plus shipping, something like that, for 2 gallons of resin. So that's quite a bit of money when you can get epoxy. Some of them you can get for 100 bucks for 2 gallons. So you save a little bit, but to me, epoxies turn completely different. They polish okay. This resin is a little bit softer. It doesn't polish quite as well as epoxy or PR. PR is the best. It polishes just beautifully, but it's so brittle. You drop a blank, a pin blank, and it probably, if it hit concrete, it probably shattered. So where this would just bounce off and it's forgiven. You continue on. But the downside is that you have to really polish it out. You have to take your time more sanding and really polish with it. So also talking about set times, they say, you know, if you're using a clear, it's a 1 hour demold, or if you're using clear slow, it's a 2 hour demold. Okay, great. So I just pulled it out of the pressure pot, pull it out of my mold. Can I turn it? Absolutely. But you have to understand that they tell you also that if you read the specs, it fully cures in 7 days or 5 days or something like that. So that means literally it would be hard enough to start machining and working right out of the pot. But polishing it is going to be a little bit different because it's really soft still until it completely sets. For me, I can tell you that you know, within a day, I have no problems turning it and polishing it. But if you really wanted to have a full cure on it, then you probably should do a full week. You can also heat cure it. Some guys heat cure it. There's some specs on that from Alumilite too. They tell you 150 degrees for, I think, 4 or 5 hours or something. I don't remember now. And it brings it to full cure. So if you're in a hurry, that's always an option.
Dane, we had a question come in for Bob about would it be more sensible to let it sit up 5 to 7 days before you turn it?
Yes. Just because you're gonna have a better, easier time with your finish on it. So talking about finishes on plastic too, if you're just turning a pepper mill out of a plastic blank, so out of this resin, and there's no wood in it, no burl in it, nothing else in it, it's just resin, then I would not put a finish on this at all. I would literally sand it to 600 grit, and then I would start wet sanding, and I use a product called Zona paper. It's Zona polishing paper, and compared to micromesh, you can't get into tight grooves. It's on a foam board, where this Zona polishing paper is very flexible and you can get into tight grooves. And then I would wet sand with it and go through their 6 grits completely. And then after that, when I'm done, I use Mcguire's plastic polish. It's called Plastex. And I apply it on the lathe with just my finger. And it's my final buff out, basically.
And you can find that at the auto parts store because it's made for cleaning your headlights on
absolutely. It's made to polish plastic. So I apply it with my finger, and it's a wax basically with some grit in it that breaks down. The more you rub it, the more it breaks into finer grit. So the more it polishes. And then just wipe your finger off occasionally as you're going. I apply it on just enough speed that I'm not slinging the stuff off. So if you're slinging it off, slow your lathe down.
Okay. Bob, can I take a little break here for just one moment?
Sure.
Because it's the top of the hour, and I have to let folks know that you're watching Worldwide Wood Turners. It comes on every Wednesday evening at 7 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We crank up the whole works at about 6:30 to let folks come in and chat and talk with us and explain what problems or they have, or if they want to show a piece or ask a question. And also have to mention that what I'm reading right now on my screen are the questions that are coming into us on the chat. And the chat is on your screen. You can put in the chat and you can ask anybody that's in here tonight, 80-something people in here tonight, a personal question or a private question, they call it, or you can ask the entire group, or you can tell one of the co-hosts that's watching different parts of this that you have a gallery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you want to participate, it's real simple. Go to our website, worldwidewoodturners.org. Got to keep saying it that way because I get calls about it. And you will find the information you will need in order to be part of our program. And it is your program, and we want you to be involved here. So that's where we head now. Bob is doing something on casting, and this is the first in a series. We won't do them all one after the other. We had Trey in here a little bit while ago, and he talked about making Christmas ornaments for our challenge that's ongoing right now. But with that, we're going to go right back to Bob again. Bob, come on back with me.
Sure. So going back to using this resin, one of the downfalls to any kind of urethane resin, which there's the two that I know of are Alumilite Clear and Alumilite Clear Slow. When you do use them, they're very moisture sensitive. So you can't have any moisture at all in any item that you're putting in the pot or in your cast, which means that even surface moisture from the humidity in the air is too much moisture. You have to dry the blanks. At the very bare minimum, you have to dry them. To dry them, it's a pretty simple process. You get them down to your equilibrium for your area, your altitude, where you're at, and your EMC you get it down to that equilibrium anyhow. So anything that's above, for me, I know my equilibrium, the stuff that's been on my shelf for 2 years in this environment, that wasn't green to start with, that was dry already, and it's been sitting here, it's probably about 17, 18% for me. And we're in a desert climate state, so that's what my moisture reader would read. So at that point, I know I can cut it into my blanks, and I'm not going to have a lot of shrinking when I do the next step, or I'm not going to have a lot of cracking happening in the next step. If I try to take a piece of green wood or something that's 40% moisture and do the next step with it, you're going to get all kinds of things happening, cracks and wood movement, twists and warping and everything else going on in your piece. So I let these all sit here for months, literally drying. And then when I know that they're down to that EMC content or EM area, 16%, 17% for me, then I can cut them into smaller pieces that would fit into my mold. For example, this piece would go into one of these blanks. And I would cut it to the size I want it, and then I would take it up and put it, I use an electric smoker for mine, personally. You can use toaster ovens, but you got to keep it away from the burners, obviously. It has to be at least a few inches away from every burner. I have a dedicated electric smoker that I use for it, and I keep it set basically at around 220 degrees, although at my altitude, they say 205-ish is boiling. and I want to be at boiling temperature or above. And I will load my oven up with plenty of airflow on all the racks on the pieces already cut to size. And then I would run it for 24 hours. And then I personally will pull any of the pieces that I thought were the wettest or the heaviest or the biggest, put it that way. And I pull them one at a time out of the oven after 24 hours. I put them on a scale and I weigh them down to the gram. And I write the weight on the bottom of the blank of the piece. Put them back in, and I go usually 4 or 5, 6 more hours minimum. Pull those same pieces back out, reweigh them. If they lost weight, they lost moisture. They have to go back in. And you repeat that over and over and over until your biggest pieces or your wettest ones that you started with don't lose any more moisture. Once they quit losing weight, they'll quit losing moisture. So now we know that they're air dry completely, down to 0%. Any of your moisture meters that you guys have are only good down to 3, 4, 5%, and then they will just read 0. So they're not accurate enough for this at all. You can't use them. You have to. The only way to do it is wait. So drying them at above boiling temperature to actually boil that water off is the way you do that. Let's see, what else? Once they're dry, and I know that then everything else should be dry that's in there because the pieces are smaller and they weren't as wet going in. Then I pull them out, and I have the big bags. You can get industrial size Ziplocs that are heavy duty. I buy them just at the grocery store, but I buy the best ones I can get. They're literally, I think 16 or 18 inches wide by 16 or 18 tall. And I double bag them. I use 2 bags, one inside of the other, because I'm doing burl with sharp edges. One bag inside the other, and then I put all my pieces in there. And you have to do that while it's hot. So wear gloves or whatever so you don't burn yourself, but it has to go in while it's hot. If I don't do it while it's hot, literally 30 minutes later, it's already absorbing moisture out of the air. It's trying to get back to equilibrium or equal, whatever that is. So equal moisture for that spot. So drying him, getting him in that bag right away is important, and get it sealed up. Get as much air as you can out and get it sealed up. Now it's good to go. It can sit in that bag on my shelf for a year if it wants to. I'm not worried about it then, but or it can go right in, and once it's cooled off enough to handle, I can put it right in my mold and cast it without problems.
Bob, got a question online here. What about food dehydrators?
Food dehydrators won't get all the moisture out. The only way to get it all out is to get it above boiling temperature. So you have to boil it off. Food dehydrator will evaporate the surface moisture off of it, but it won't take it much past that. So just keep that in mind.
Okay.
When you're casting your pieces and you pull them out, they have a skin on them. So this has a skin on it. It hasn't been trimmed off. I guarantee you that if I was to trim it off, and it wouldn't be this color, it would be blues, but there was going to be all kinds of detail in this blank. So you can't go by what's on the outside. You'll never tell what's inside of this until you actually cut into it. So I cast all our blanks in bigger blanks, and then I trim basically a 1/16 off of every side so that you can actually see what's inside. This could have burl hiding in it, and I would never know it until I trimmed it. That's that skin that gets on it, so keep that in mind. Now, once I trim it, if I see bubbles along this burl line, that's moisture from inside the burl. If you see foaming, that's a lot of moisture from inside the burl. Or it could be moisture from your air compressor. So I use a moisture trap. You got to keep all the moisture out. This stuff is just extremely sensitive to it. So that's the biggest.
We have another question about what about infusing wood with cactus juice?
Sure. So stabilizing and casting are two different things. You must understand that. Stabilizing does not fill pores. Stabilizing takes soft, punky stuff that you can dig your fingernail into, like this piece, that's really not something that you could mount on a lathe and turn because it's so soft, it'd have all kinds of tear out. So stabilizing with this piece is going to turn it into, it's going to help plasticize the piece. Basically, it impregnates it with a plastic, and once cured, that plastic turns hard. But what it's doing is it's getting in the fibers will absorb it, and then when you heat cure it, so in the vacuum chamber, it sucks all the air out. You let off the vacuum, it pulls all the whatever you're using for your stabilizing liquid in, and then you let that set for a period of time. We can do one on stabilizing too if you'd like another time.
In the future, yeah.
What's that?
In the future, we will do that, please.
Sure, sure. So then you take it and cure it, and it turns it hard. Now, you can see this one has cured cactus juice on the outside of it, just a little bit. So that's typical. You get this buildup on it, and if you put it in foil, you'll have a layer of plastic on the bottom from it drip out. So the object of this for us, I stabilize everything that I cast. If you have the capability, do it. It's important. And the reason it's important is this. So this piece of burl, if I hadn't stabilized it, say I was able to turn it. It was hard enough that I could turn it. It was solid enough piece that I could have turned it. Great. So I turn it. I actually cast it. I turn it. And everything's great. I go through all the process of finishing it, doing whatever my finish is on it. And because it wasn't stabilized, if I didn't stabilize it, is what will happen is with heat or with moisture in different, for example, how do I say that? If I take it from a dry climate to a humid climate, it's going to expand, and you'll actually feel that joint. You'll feel the burl line. And if I go to a dry climate, it's going to shrink. And then it's possible of cracking, and it's still going to, you're going to feel that joint. Even though it's finished, it's absorbed, it absorbs and it expands or it contracts with the moisture from the air. So stabilizing it helps keep that from happening. This was turned, like I said, 2 years ago, and you can't feel that line. So that's an important step for a finished turning of top quality, in my opinion. There are some exceptions to that.
Bob got one more item.
Sure.
Can you use a vacuum pump to get the moisture out?
No, vacuum won't pull moisture. It can't vaporize it. It's too solid.
Okay. See, they're paying attention, Bob. We got just a moment or two to go if we can.
Sure. Just talking about burl real quick. This is red mallee or brown mallee burl. And any of the mallees or any of the most of the Australian timbers are so dense, they don't take much stabilization. They won't hardly gain any weight. So if you don't have the possibility of stabilizing something, but you want to cast burl, I would recommend something like that, something that's super dense, because they're not going to expand and contract with moisture. They're so dense. But let's field questions.
Any additional questions? We've been covering them as they show up on chat, and I'll mention this again. A lot of information you want is on our chat program. Before you leave tonight, press chat, save chat. If you do it any time before then, you won't save that didn't happen yet.
Bob, can you touch on volume versus weight on mixing?
Yes, absolutely. So with this resin, it's mixed by weight. So I can tell you that when I get a bottle of part A and a bottle of part B, when you look at them, when you get them right from the manufacturer, B side will have more liquid in it than the A side bottle will. That's because the B actually weighs more or less, however that works. So you have to actually add more to it. So the difference is with this type of resin, you have to weigh it, and it's a 1-to-1 mix. So if you're weigh it in grams. The smaller the pour, the more accurate you have to be. If I'm doing a large pour and I'm down to a gram, then I'm great. If I'm doing one single pin blank and I'm down to a gram, I may be pushing it. I might need to do tenths of grams even to get that harder ratio right.
Are you using something like a postal scale?
Yeah, so I actually, you can get just a cheap gram scale. I use this one, and it's covered in resin, but this one's nice because it has a flip top, and I actually have, because my hands are always in resin, so I can keep the screen clean, and then this I just dispose of and throw away after a while. But it's a top of the line scale, and it was only like 40 bucks, but you can get the little cheap gram scales. Just make sure it's going to do the biggest pour you need it to do. And if you're going to do pin blanks, I would even try to get it down to 10th gram.
Okay. Any other questions for Bob?
If not, I can talk about molds if we have any time left at all. But
well, Bob, we're supposed to wrap up for 8:30, and I know we got a couple of folks out there that want to get in and chat a little bit. But you did great, man. We really do appreciate what you shared. Now we're going to put you on the hook. We can come back to you again for more, right?
Sure, absolutely, anytime.
All right.
There's a lot more. There's a lot more involved with this, especially with molds and talking about different dyes versus pigments versus micas. And molds, soft molds, hard molds. I mean, there's a lot of difference there as well. Cheap molds, one-time molds versus actually spending money on an expensive mold that you're going to use over and over. So,
okay. Well, thank you, Bob. I very much appreciate it. And Bob's information for contact is on our chat screen. So if you save chat, you'll be able to get that information. Thank you, Bob. We'll see you again next time, sir.
Any questions, reach out to us.